Rhaenyra was dead, and King Aegon sat the Iron Throne again. But only for half a year. He was poisoned by his own men and replaced with the very boy who had watched his mother devoured.
When Rhaenyra's last son wed Aegon's only daughter, the Dance of Dragons officially ended. Ash and burned men, all that was left of the Riverlands. Two scared children spouting oaths they didn't understand, all that was left of the mighty House Targaryen. Ancient skulls and hatchlings that grew no bigger than cats, all that was left of the dragons.
The father reached his hand into the heavens and pulled down 7 stars, and one by one he set them on the brow of Hugo of the Hill to make a glowing crown. The maid brought him forth a girl as supple as willow, with eyes like deep pools, and Hugo declared that he would have her for his bride. So the mother made her fertile, and the crone foretold that she would bear the king 44 mighty sons. The warrior gave strength to their arms, whilst the smith wrought for each a suit of iron plates. But sadly, the gods no longer walk the earth among us, and you can see what a mess we've made of their creation since. Yet we have hope. The gods didn't abandon us in silence, but gave us their holy words to guide us, collected in the oldest and holiest text of the faith of the seven-pointed star. Divided into 7 books for the 7 aspects of God, in it we learn of the father's justice, the mother's mercy, the maiden's innocence, the crone's wisdom, the warrior's strength, the smith's labor, and the stranger's peace. It is a long book. Many never read it in its entirety, even if they could. When the Andals first sailed for Westeros, filled with divine fire, every warrior carved a 7-pointed star into his body, for even that was easier than carving its namesake into his mind. Though one could perhaps argue that it wasn't the warriors, but the septons and septors, armed with the holy text of the 7-pointed star, who truly conquered Westeros. The first men had no letters, but the runes they would scratch onto rocks. No gods, but the faces they would carve into trees. But then came our holy men and women among them, bearing the very words of the gods under their arms. Trees and rocks were no match for the 7-pointed star, and most of Westeros soon turned to the faith and to its guardians, their new Andal overlords. Whilst the Andals soon fractured into warring kingdoms, the faith remained whole and indivisible, bound together by the 7-pointed star. When those kingdoms fell to Aegon and his dragons thousands of years later, the faith remained subject only to the 7 above and the 7-pointed star below. Or so it was supposed to be. Too often, our high septons have lost their way, clouded by worldly wealth and power. No matter. We still have the 7-pointed star. Men's will and virtue may fail, but the words never do. As men bow to their lords and lords to their kings, so kings and queens must bow before the 7 who are one. The knees of the powerful work the same as the knees of the weak, and were given to all for the same purpose, to bend before the gods, or break in the bending. Today, men know the 7 as statues in the septs, but in the old days, the gods themselves walked among men. They crowned Hugo of the Hill, the first king of the Andal people, and promised him that his descendants would rule great kingdoms in a foreign continent. When the time came, the Andals carved the 7-pointed star upon their bodies and set sail for the strange land across the narrow sea, Westeros. Whilst Andal warriors battled the first men for kingdoms, Andal septons battled for souls and were received just as courteously. We don't know how many bold and pious men lost their lives, but adversity bred strength. Our purest and most righteous believers took up the sword to defend and preserve the faith from its enemies. So was born the Order of the Faith Militant. When Aegon the Conqueror landed in Westeros, the High Septon locked himself in a sept for 7 days and 7 nights. Finally, the crone lifted her golden lamp and showed him the path ahead. The High Septon himself would anoint and crown Aegon as Lord of the 7 Kingdoms, and the Faith Militant rallied behind Aegon in governing his newly united land. Yet Aegon and his sisters never wholly accepted the faith. The High Septon had conceded Aegon's marriages to his sisters as a relic of his Valyrian heritage, which would soon fade. But when Aegon's heir wed his daughter to his son, the faith could brook such abomination no longer. The High Septon led the denunciation of the Targaryens, and all over Westeros the Faith Militant took up their swords against the dynasty and its supporters. The Faith Militant set upon and punished the Septon who had performed the ceremony. A few of the Faith Militant's more militant members even scaled the walls of the castle and would have slain the king and his family had a knight of the King's Guard not intervened. Frightened, the king fled to Dragonstone, where he soon died of cramps. And so ascended the king's younger brother, Maegor the Cruel. His first act was to challenge the Faith Militant to kill him if they believed his rule to be ungodly. To the Order's eternal credit, they accepted. Ser Daemon Morrigan proposed a trial by 7, Ser Daemon and 6 of the Faith Militant against the king and his 6 champions. It was a contest in which the kingdom itself was at stake, and the accounts and tales are many. But at the end of it, Maegor alone lived, proving that the throne was rightfully his. He mounted the Black Dragon, Balerion, and burnt down the Sept in King's Landing, while the Faith Militant were inside at morning prayers. The screams of the burning and dying men were said to echo throughout the city. Though Maegor had won the trial by 7, he demanded the complete destruction of the Faith Militant and the faith itself, if necessary. He made war upon the Order wherever he found it. Yet the Faith Militant would not surrender, raising armies of their own and turning Maegor's own lords against him. The Father's justice may not always be swift, but it is certain. One morning, Maegor was found dead on the Iron Throne. No one knows how. Maegor's cruelty died with him. His successor saw the wisdom of a united crown and faith, and his hand reached an accord with the High Septon. As long as the Iron Throne defended the faith would put aside its own swords and its condemnation of the Targaryens. Perhaps the High Septon felt he had no course but compromise. Outlawed and hunted for years, the Faith Militant was but a shadow of its former self. Without its own guardians, the faith would have to rely on corrupt, worldly kings and their corrupt, worldly courts. For thousands of years, the Faith Militant had stood watch over the faith. And then, its sun set. Now, after years of war and destruction, of abomination and blasphemy, none can argue that we have been walking through darkness. Perhaps the time has come when the sun must rise again.
Valyria was young, and as the young do, it sought to spread its seed. Its first daughter was Volantis, an outpost on the mighty Rhoyne River at the frontier of the Empire. There the Dragon Lords raised the famous Black Walls, seamless fused dragonstone 200 feet tall, and so thick that 6 4-horse chariots can race along the battlements side by side, as they do each year to celebrate the founding of the city. To this day, only those who can trace their ancestry back to old Valyria are allowed to dwell within the Black Walls. None are even permitted to set foot inside without an express invitation of a scion of the old blood, meaning, of course, the ancient and noble blood of foot soldiers. For the city's first 100 years, its only inhabitants wear its garrison. But where soldiers go, vice follows. Taverns and brothels began to sprout up outside the Black Walls, and merchant ships began to call as well, bearing the favored trade of the summer sea, slaves. The East Bank filled with homes, shops, and society, and so the taverns and brothels moved to the West Bank, where foreigners, sellswords, and pirates erected their own shadow city of fornication, drunkenness, and murder. In time, the West Bank became such a cesspit of crime and depravity that the Volantines had no choice but to send their slave soldiers across the Rhoyne to restore order and some semblance of decency. Like all such missions, they succeeded, they left, then they failed. When the Volantines grew weary of shipping their soldiers across the Rhoyne every year, they built the famous Long Bridge of Volantis, strong enough to support the weight of 1,000 elephants and many more soldiers. The Long Bridge of Volantis stands today as the longest bridge in all the known world. The Volantine rulers intended the bridge to spread the civilization of the East Bank to the west. Instead, the depravity of the West Bank spread east. Shops, temples, taverns, inns, and brothels line the bridge, most 3 or 4 stories tall, with each floor overhanging the one beneath it. One can buy anything on the Long Bridge, or steal it, if one's hands are quick enough. But if they're not... Though at least half the decor committed no greater crime than displeasing a master, for in Volantis there are 5 slaves for every free man, a proportion matched only by the cities of Slavers Bay. The Volantine masters mark their property with facial tattoos, permanent and scarring, which denote the vocation of the slave. Slave soldiers wear green tiger stripes upon their faces. Slave whores are marked by tears beneath one eye. The slaves that collect the dung of horses and elephants are marked with flies. The drivers of the hathays, the carts pulled by the small elephants of Volantis, are marked with wheels, and so on. A master may give his slave freedom, but no man can give a new face. Is it any wonder, then, that the slaves and freed men have turned in such great numbers to the priests who preach of a cleansing fire? The Temple of the Lord of Light in Volantis is said to be the greatest in all the world, larger even than the great sept of Baelor. All who serve within this mighty temple are slaves, bought as children and trained to become priests, temple prostitutes, or warriors. And one could argue its adherents outside the temple are slaves as well, in mind if not in body. Magic frees nobody except its practitioner to do what he will with those who can't, just as the Black Walls free the old blood to see what they will. Without those they don't. But one must wonder how much longer such freedoms will endure, when across Essos one hears the sound of chains breaking, of slaves rising, of dragons roaring. Volantis may call itself the first daughter of Valyria, but it is not the last.
Most cities are built on stone. Braavos was built on ships, or more specifically, their cargo. Slaves who rose up against their Valyrian captors and seized the helms of the convoy. Of all crimes, Valyria punished rebellion most severely. The slaves faced not execution, but the Valyrian mines or labor camps in the most remote and savage colonies if recaptured. And few corners of the world can long remain hidden from Dragonback. However, our histories claim that a group of slave women prophesied the slaves would find shelter in a distant lagoon behind a wall of pine-clad hills and sea stones, where the frequent fogs would help hide the refugees from the eyes of dragon riders passing overhead. And so it proved. Because they had risked their lives in the name of freedom, the mothers and fathers of the new city vowed that no man, woman, or child in Braavos should ever be a slave. This is the first law of Braavos. engraved in stone on the arch that spans the long canal. For over 100 years, Braavos hid itself from the eyes of the world, who called it the Secret City. Using a dye derived from a local snail, our captains stained their sails purple to hide their stolen Valyrian ships. Our merchants carried false charts and lied when questioned about their home port. Eventually, one Sea Lord, our elected ruler, decided enough time had passed and initiated the unmasking of Braavos to the world and to Valyria. Of course, it helped that the Iron Bank made handsome restitution to the Dragon Lords for the stolen ships, whilst of course refusing to pay for the value of the slaves themselves. The anniversary of the unmasking is celebrated every year in Braavos with 10 days of feasting and masked revelry, a festival like none other in the known world, culminating at midnight on the 10th day when the Titan roars and tens of thousands of celebrants remove their masks as one. Freed of the constraints of secrecy, Braavos quickly grew into the wealthiest and most powerful of the free cities, and, one could argue, the most beautiful. From the sprawling Sea Lord's palace with its menagerie of strange beasts and birds, to the imposing Palace of Justice and the aqueduct we call the Sweetwater River that bears fresh water from the mainland, Braavos is without rival in either engineering or elegance. The temples of Braavos are also famed throughout the world and wondrous to behold. Descended from 100 different peoples, the Braavosi honor 100 different gods. The Temple of the Moon Singers is the foremost of these, being the faith of the slave women whose prophecies led our ancestors here. The Lord of Light has a great temple as well, for his worshippers have grown ever more numerous in the past 100 years. Yet less numerous, and even some forgotten faiths still have temples deep in the heart of the city, on the Isle of the Gods. But the beauty of Braavos is not only in her buildings. Braavosi swordsmanship is renowned throughout the world. Our bravos eschew the armor and long swords of the Westerosi knights, preferring speed, agility, and slender blades. The greatest bravos call themselves water dancers, after the custom of dueling upon the moon pool near the Sea Lord's palace. By tradition, the greatest of all the bravos is the First Sword, who commands the personal guard of the Sea Lord and protects his person at all public events. Once chosen, Sea Lords serve for life. Inevitably, there are always those who wish to cut that life short to effect some change in policy. Though not even the First Swords are the true guardians of Braavos. That honor goes to the Titan, who protects the entrance to the harbor. With his proud head and fiery eyes looming close to 400 feet above the sea, the Titan is a fortress of a kind never seen before or since. His eyes are huge beacon fires, lighting the way for returning ships into the lagoon. Within his bronze body are halls and chambers, murder holes and arrow slits. Enemy ships can be steered onto the rocks by the watchmen inside the Titan, and stones and pots of burning pitch can be dropped onto the decks of any that attempt to pass between the Titan's legs without leave. This has seldom been necessary, however. Not since the Century of Blood has any enemy been so rash as to attempt to provoke the Titan's wrath. Should an enemy break through into the lagoon, however, he would face the walls of Braavos, again not of stone like other cities, but of ships. The arsenal of Braavos can build one of our famous purple-hulled war galleys in a single day. All the vessels are constructed following the same design, so that all the many parts can be prepared in advance, and skilled shipbuilders work upon different sections of the vessel simultaneously to hasten the labor. To organize such a feat of engineering is unprecedented. One need only look at the raucous, confused construction in the shipyards around the world to see the truth of this. Let us imagine that even the arsenal, great as it is, failed us. An enemy who could defeat both the Titan and our fleet would be strong indeed. But Braavos does not depend only on statues and ships. We also have iron and gold. Who are the faceless men? It depends on who is asking. To a penitent, they may be relief. To a victim, they may be vengeance. To a lord, they may be an incredible expense. And to the Iron Bank, they may be just another asset. Nobody but the Faceless Men know their origin, though the Order is rumored to predate the founding of Braavos. We know only that they reside in, or are somehow aligned with, the House of Black and White, that odd and lonely building where few who enter ever leave. Some whisper that those werewood doors open not on a house, but onto the world of the dead, from whence the Faceless Men rise when summoned. We can dismiss such foolishness as we do the fishwives who spread it. The House of Black and White is merely a temple, consecrated to the many-faced god, and filled with statuary of his many faces. The old gods of Westeros, the Lord of Light, the Black Goat, the Lion of Night, the Weeping Lady, the Stranger. Perhaps now you understand what is worshipped here, and along with them, other gods whom none alive now recognize, brought here long ago by sailors who never came again. Unlike the priests of other religions, the servants here preach no sermons and perform no ceremonies. As far as one can see, silence and solitude form the whole of their worship, as well as collecting the occasional devotee. If one wants to engage a faceless man, one visits the House of Black and White and pays the price. As for what that may be, those who have paid it rarely speak of it. For make no mistake, from the moment the Faceless Men accept your offer, the man you named is dead, though he doesn't know it. Perhaps not that day, perhaps not that year, but soon, and inevitably. Many would say you are as much his murderer as if you'd swung the axe yourself, just as many would say that's the point.